Welcome back. Let's turn to the latest in Washington. News reports last week, President Joe Biden, or at least his advisors, reportedly talking about whether to issue preemptive pardons on the way out the door for people that they perceive as at risk of a potential prosecution or investigation by the incoming Trump administration Justice Department. And it might include Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney. Let's listen on that point to Donald Trump on Meet the Press this weekend.
So you think Liz Cheney should go to jail?
For what they did.
Everyone on the committee, you think?
I think everybody anybody that voted in favor.
Are you going to direct your FBI director and your attorney general to send them to jail?
No, not at all. I think that they'll have to look at that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to focus on drill, baby, drill.
When you say that, it carries weight, though. You've tapped these people to lead the Justice Department and FBI.
They can do whatever they want.
Okay.
Biden can give him a pardon if he wants to, and maybe he should. Just remember, unselect committee, a year and a half of sworn testimony, and after getting all of the testimony, they deleted it, and they destroyed almost everything. There's nothing left. It's unprecedented.
And they denied
doing that. If you do
that
in a civil case, you go to jail.
Kim, what do you make of this? Some of the news reports on these conversations within the White House suggest that, along with Liz Cheney, other people who might be considered for pardons would be Adam Schiff, Anthony Fauci, Jack Smith. What do you make of this as an idea for Biden to preemptively pardon people on his way out the door?
I can't actually think of a worse idea in terms of what it would mean for breaking more standards and norms, but also setting this precedent and continuing us down this road of lawfare, okay? Because let's just think about how this would actually play out in terms of the precedent. He goes and Biden issues blanket pardons, meaning covering all the actions of anything that any official did for X period of time, numerous numbers of those officials. So now we've got this list. These people all have automatic get out of jail free cards for everything they did for a set period of time. Why does anyone think Biden would be the only president who would do that? Of course not. He would be the first, and then it would become a new presidential standard. And I'd like Democrats to stop and think about what that would mean, for instance, in a Donald Trump presidency. So he goes out and all of his cabinet officials and all of the people who worked in his administration, he says, you all have pardons for all of your actions that you took, not just in office, but even prior to then. You know, we're hearing right now all the Democratic wails over Kash Patel potentially running the FBI. Do you want to create a scenario in which Biden has made this precedent and then Kash Patel or any Trump nominee goes in and knows it doesn't really matter what I do in office because the president will give me a pardon as I walk out the door? That is a recipe for a kind of culture, we said in our editorial, a culture of impunity where you would have officials that would no longer be holding faith to the Constitution and law and order, but to the knowledge that a president would just tell them you get out of jail free card when you leave office.
I tend to agree with Kim. It seems like the idea here would be that we are in a mode of partisan lawfare and retribution, and that pardons by President Biden would be a way to end that, to cool the political temperature. But Bill, it seems to me like it would almost be the opposite. It would be the next escalation. It would be an attempt to insulate my side from any sort of investigations while leaving the other side exposed. And then the other side would do the exact opposite when the shoe is on the other foot. It seems to me like if Biden really wanted to lower the temperature, he should talk about pardoning President Trump for the federal cases that his own Justice Department under special counsel Jack Smith have brought. And granted, maybe Trump would try to reject that out of hand and say that he doesn't need a pardon, but it wouldn't stop President Biden from raising the question and issuing some kind of pardon statement.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a good point about Joe Biden. Look, the Democratic Party has become the norm-busting party. For all the talk about Donald Trump, whether it's the filibuster, the Electoral College, or the pardon power, as soon as something they think is going against them, they want to change it. And no regard to the consequences. Kim laid out some of the consequences. I think I agree with all of them, and I feel safe in predicting they'd be worse than we even imagine. When you let that genie out of the bottle, as you point out, there'd be less accountability rather than more. If Joe Biden really wanted to move on, as he said in his speech shortly after he was elected in 2020, I think he could have gone further. I think he might have offered to commute the sentences, at least, of some of the J6 people in jail whom Bill Barr said have received excessive sentences. Something like that would take guts, and he didn't do it. Or he could have said he's pardoning Trump. Or Trump could have announced that he's going to pardon hunters and spare the country, Joe Biden doing it for his son. But I don't think Biden has it in him. He's always been very mean-spirited and partisan when it comes to these things. And I think he's going out as he came in and setting a terrible precedent. And the only question is, will it be made worse by more pardons, in the next month?
Hang tight. We'll be right back after one more break. Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. The extraordinarily broad pardon that Joe gave Hunter Biden is the context, though. And Kim, just another classic example of one bad precedent begetting another bad precedent. Because remember, a typical presidential pardon is a clemency for a specific enumerated listed crime. This person has been charged with X, and I, as the president, am pardoning this person for that offense. And that is not what Biden did with his son. He said anything that Hunter did that is a federal crime for more than a decade is wiped away. And there are experts on the pardon power who've said that there's not really precedent for that. The closest they can come is Gerald Ford's pardoning of Richard Nixon after Watergate. But Kim, there is some internal logic to the argument that if Biden is willing to do that for his son and protect his son from any future investigation that way, and his son is someone who has been convicted on some of these crimes and has pled guilty to others of them, then why wouldn't he do that for people in his administration who he thinks did nothing wrong and are not facing the kind of real gun tax charges that he wiped away for Hunter?
Yeah, and this is the real problem you just put your finger on with that Hunter pardon. It wasn't just the sort of ugliness of the fact that it was for his own son, but the sweeping nature of it was another one of these boundary breakers. And one thing that I would throw out there, too, is the Biden White House considers doing this, and as Democrats ramp up their pleas for Biden to do this, is that at a certain point, that the presidential pardon power is obviously very vast and huge. Many presidents have abused it in one form or another, but for the most part, they've largely done it in ways that cause some public controversy, but not necessarily provoke a debate about the policy itself. And, if Biden were to go down this road, I don't think it hard to imagine that it would kick off a debate about potentially the need for a new constitutional amendment to somehow rein it in or set limits on the way it can be used. Is this really the debate we want to be having as a country right now? We have so many issues we need to be tackling and fixing. And this is, I think, the natural kind of going down the path of the lawfare that Democrats began, and it just continues to escalate. And at a certain point, I could not agree with Bill more. Somebody has to say enough is enough already and just stop it and go back to trying winning elections by real means, meaning making an argument to voters and getting them to vote for you instead of suing and trying to jail your political opponents and then ending up in a situation where you have to pardon all of your political allies because of the lawfare you created in the first place.
I agree with that, though I would add in the winner of the last election who could stand to be a bit magnanimous about it. Bill, one of the things that is encouraging this kind of thinking in the Biden administration is when President Trump talks like he did on Meet the Press. And granted, he does veer back and forth. Sometimes he says that my retribution is going to be success. Sometimes he says, I'm not going to tell my FBI director to do that. But then immediately afterward, he says, but those people, they really do belong in jail. And Bill, to my mind, it would do the country a lot of good, and it would do President Trump some good if he would come out and disavow this kind of stuff and say that that's not what my next administration is going to be about. that could help calm the waters here some.
Yeah, I wish Donald Trump wouldn't say that stuff. I didn't like when he said it about Hillary Clinton in 2016. Of course, he didn't end up prosecuting Hillary Clinton. I'd like to see a little more outrage. Democrats have spent 4 years saying that Trump should be locked up and so forth. And there's been very little criticism then. And to go back to Hunter Spartan, not only was it sweeping, not only did it break all the promises Joe Biden made, if you read the statement that went with it, he didn't say, my son's been through enough. You know, he did wrong things, but he's been punished enough. I want to end it. No, he said the people who are really wrong are the people that prosecuted my son. Hunter is, a great person. And he did an unapologetic, very angry kind of note with it. And I think that shows what they're up against. So I wish Donald Trump wouldn't say these things. I don't think he's going to stop. I don't think he's going to prosecute, though.
Kim, what's your take on this? Bill raises a good point that there were chants at Trump rallies in 2016 to lock her up. Trump himself said Hillary Clinton has to go to jail, and that is not what he did in the first Trump administration. So do you read these similar comments about Liz Cheney as him popping off on Truth Social for the applause of fans, speaking in a campaign kind of manner, and with the kind of exaggeration that, needless to say, is no stranger to Donald Trump?
I don't know. Sometimes when I hear Donald Trump, I sort of feel like it's that, that uncle at Thanksgiving that thinks everyone should go to jail, that they don't, that they don't like. We have this conversation a lot in my family because
I'm that uncle.
You're that uncle. I know. We've all had this conversation, right? People are very angry over some aspect of politics. And they said, well, those people ought to just go to jail. And when you go to have a conversation about what law was actually broken and do we really want a system where people are jailing folks they don't like in politics all the time, usually everyone kind of agrees, well, that's probably not a really good idea. But I really dislike that guy, right? That's kind of how I look at Donald Trump. Yeah. And I also think there is probably an aspect of it that he knows that a lot of Americans feel as though that there have been a lot of dirty tricks in politics and that people aren't held accountable for it often enough. And so that's the other thing that makes people knee jerk say they ought to go to jail. You want to know weirdly who I put a lot of blame for this for in this environment where everybody's constantly saying the other side should go to jail is the press. Because there used to be a day when politicians did something that was not illegal, but just kind of not worthy of public office. And then you would get shamed, right? You were run out of the public sphere and the press would help make that judgment. But we've had a lot of Democrats that have engaged in bad behavior in recent years, and they've just been cheered by the press. James Comey leaves his office and, he gets a book deal and a teaching professorship at like a lovely university. There's no shame attached to disgraceful behavior anymore. And that makes people knee jerk say, well, there ought to be some other kind of accountability. And fortunately, in my mind, the first thing that comes to mind is you ought to go to jail.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Bill. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.